Alarm. Tab. World clock. Stopwatch. Tab. System launcher. 3. Colon. 50. Instant WhatsApp as TikTok. Keep post. My files. YouTube. Recorder. Chat. Settings. Installer. Installer. Go to page. Edit up. Current page 100. Go to page. Settings. Tools. Button. Play. Button.
अस्सलामुअलैकुम वरहमतुल्लाहि वबरकातुहू। मैं हूं आपका दोस्त, आपका होस्ट सैयद कल्बे मेहदी, और आप देख रहे हैं सरमस्त पोइट्री ऑफिशियल की आवाज़। अगर आप हमारे चैनल पर न्यू हैं तो चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कर लें, लाइक कर लें और बेल आइकन के बटन को प्रेस करना मत भूलिएगा और ऑल नोटिफिकेशन पे सिलेक्ट कर लीजिएगा ताकि इस तरह की हर नई आने वाली वीडियो का नोटिफिकेशन आपको बर वक्त मौसूल हो सके। आज का हमारा टॉपिक है टेल मी वाई ऑडियो बुक पार्ट 2। आप स्ट्रीमिंग को लाइक करें और कमेंट सेक्शन बॉक्स में अपनी कीमती राय का इजहार ज़रूर करें। आपकी सपोर्ट हमारा हौसला है और आपकी सपोर्ट हमें इतनी सिर्फ चाहिए कि आप चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कर लें। तो बढ़ते हैं हम अपने पार्ट 2 की जानब।
Idea who this Solomon is. She shook her head. You had Tyson at Ballarat base on December 16th. Did anything odd happen while you were there? Incidents with staff members or other patients? No one strike you as obsessive or judgmental? Nothing, she sighed. Do you belong to a mother's group? No. I expected there'd be awkwardness over Tyson's dad. Next, he jotted down details of her doctor, medical clinic and maternal health center. He'd mapped the links between the victims, hoping that not all roads would lead to the hospital, which contained too many possible but not altogether probable suspects. In any event, he still had local angles to investigate. The staff at the health center, anyone there a potential Solomon? She hesitated, then shrugged. Franklin scrutinized her face while he finally asked, have you ever come? Page 133. Across a bloke by the name of Arthur Hammer. Kathy thought for a moment. I don't think so. Ever been to one of the local pubs and seen an old man on his soapbox about women? She looked perplexed. What do you mean? He actually stands on whatever's to hand outside the pub and rants about women taking babies into pubs or breastfeeding in public. Or, one of my favorites, condemning them for going to the pub without a suitable male chaperone. Franklin snorted, and Kathy looked stunned. He rotates around places here and outside town too. You're kidding. Nope. I'm not keen on pubs and haven't been near one since before I fell pregnant. He nodded. So you think this Arthur Hammer is Solomon? Franklin lifted a palm. No, it's just a line of inquiry. Don't read anything into my questions, okay? Sorry. No need to apologize. Franklin rubbed his chin and contemplated other common denominators between the mums and the letters. He slowly reread Kathy's 2 letters. An idea struck. He lifted his eyebrows. Are you religious? Number. Well, I'm Christian but don't go to church. Haven't done since my teens, except for weddings and funerals. After a small pause, she voiced what he'd thought. It sounds straight out of the Bible, doesn't it? It does, he agreed. If you were to label yourself Catholic, C of E, uniting, what would it be? Presbyterian. Oh, Franklin was disappointed. Lauren had considered speaking to a priest. He knew that Roman Catholics had priests, whereas Presbyterians referred to their preachers as ministers. The women didn't even have a mutual lapsed faith. Page 134. The hospital's odds shortened. Georgie picked around the house, checked each window. Thick white lace draped tall but the fanlight over the back door. She climbed on top of Margaret's wheelie bin and peered into a spotless kitchen. The younger Pentecost woman belonged to the proud housekeeper league with her aunt. Unfortunately, the niece was less naive than Susan. Both external doors were locked. Foiled, Georgie scanned the back garden and spied a garage tucked to the bottom. Like their rental in Richmond, vehicular access was a rear laneway. She jogged down and circled the windowless, colored steel construction. One access door to the garden was padlocked. She let the lock drop against the door. Did the shed hold Margaret's car? Susan's Land Cruiser? She wished she knew. So far, the detour had proved to be another time waster. Georgie pushed a note and her business card underneath the front door and backtracked towards the Alpha. Yoo-hoo. She pivoted. Hello there, a woman with a cherubic face called. She waved a dimpled arm over the paling boundary fence. Are you looking for Margaret? Georgie managed a yes before the other woman talked on. She's not home. Aqua eyes shone inquisitively, then flicked towards a honking car. Oops, I have to run. The chubby woman trotted to the vehicle. As she hopped into the back, Georgie heard a gaggle of excited female voices. They sped towards Sturt Street. Pained by anticlimax, she counted on the note working when Margaret returned. Meanwhile, it wouldn't hurt to dig elsewhere. Page 135. Where the Western Highway had earlier dissected Sunshine to Ballarat in its bland, anonymous motorway manner in around 70 minutes, Midland Highway meandered from the regional gold town to Daylesford in about 35. Despite it being a weekday, Georgie couldn't shake free a couple of cars. Every time she pulled the Spider away, either the white Nissan Skyline or the black Ford F-150 would leapfrog the other and sit on her tail. At a tiny town called Newlyn, she veered onto the gravel shoulder outside a church-cum-antiques store to dig out her ringing phone. The cars passed, no doubt mates having a bit of fun. She checked the mobile screen as she slid it into the cradle. Then flicked to her watch and swore, "Fuck, the bloody deadline." She thumbed the connect switch. "David. It's past 12. Yes, I'm. You need to take this seriously." "I am, just. We need to meet." Oh, her stomach dropped. "Your script needs severe editing, and, well, we need to meet. All of us, to get this thing back on track. How are you for tomorrow?" Georgie hated to admit it, but she needed payment for the project to cover her imminent credit card bill and rent share. They agreed to gather at Miller Street at 10 the next morning. She swiped sweat from her brow and shifted on the leather seat. High 20s already, the sun held a vicious kick. Tempted to stop at Daylesford's ice cream parlor, she instead gravitated towards Abigaildy. It had to hold a clue to Susan's absence. Page 136. Simultaneous with an empty stomach growl, Georgie strode into Susan's kitchen. As she did, she experienced something she'd often sensed at Bronze. The house wrapped her into a hug and welcomed her to come and go. She did a quick walk through. First disappointment, Oscar didn't materialize, even when she called. She inhaled stale air, saw no change since yesterday, right down to the crusty plates piled in the sink. Bigger letdown, Susan hadn't returned. Georgie's energy waned. She was sapped by the anticlimactic start, clueless about what to do next and needed to refuel her body. She attacked a packet of chocolate chip biscuits and necked the Coke lurking in the back of the fridge. Flat but cold, it hit the spot. She repaced the house, searched more thoroughly. Even so, she knew it was time wasted, that second-guessing her instincts and the Patterson-Stewart network would result in the same answer. Back in the kitchen, she kicked out a chair and slumped onto it, elbows on the table. She munched on a biscuit, brain strained, still clueless but determined to make a breakthrough. She returned to Susan's bedroom, ran a hand over the bed and under the mattress. Found nothing. "Where are you, Rolly?" Georgie addressed the musty men's clothes in the left wardrobe. Glancing at the barren pillows, she added, "Where are you both?" In the study, she swiveled in the desk chair until the sofa, bookcases and filing cabinets swirled. She grabbed the edge of the desk, drummed her fingernails, focused on one bookcase, narrowed in on the mate to the album she had borrowed on Saturday and reached for it. Consistent with the one back in Richmond, it contained newspaper clippings. Or rather, photocopies and printouts of archived stories at the beginning, followed by cuttings of more recent articles. Subject matter for all, John Schlicht. Page 137. Franklin couldn't throw off his dark mood, and he couldn't say if it related more to Kathy's rape, Solomon's threats or Art Hammer's vanishing act. Okay, that was probably a bit cat at her drama queen best. But while the old man normally turned up like a bad smell and had fairly predictable habits, now when Franklin wanted to find him, he couldn't. A drag past Art's Mollinger property and checks with the publicans at Burke's and the Rush Hotel all bombed. Rather than spend the next hour trawling the other nearby pubs to come up with more nothing, he decided on a new tack. Why the hell would you have a scrapbook on Schlicht? Georgie flicked through Susan's book, frequently shaking her head. She remembered stories about Schlicht and his thugs and the notorious Honoured Society, Melbourne's so-called mafia. A curious kid, Georgie had curled at the feet of Grandma Harvey, enraptured, yet also suspicious that the accounts amounted to urban myth. Susan's articles tracked allegations against Schlicht and his counterparts, that they used the vegetable markets to conceal drug activities and launder the proceeds, while extorting a fortune from other merchants. They produced, imported, transported and distributed cannabis, heroin, cocaine and amphetamines. Sex, drugs, violence, deadly reprisals from rival gangs, the police impotent or in the pocket, all there in the articles, some journalists more gloves off in their approach than others. Urban myth or fact, it sold newspapers and generated big bucks for the commercial TV stations currently cashing in on one sleazy underworld show after another. Her recollection hazy, Georgie knew that Schlicht had somehow lost his stake in the markets and dropped away from the underbelly of organized crime. She hadn't seen his photograph for several years and the bushy grey brows, frigid grey blue stare on a long, bony face that earned Schlicht the nickname, the Page 138. Iceman, spooked her. Not the type of guy you'd want to meet in a dark alley. Nor was he an obvious subject for a scrapbook. Intrigued but time poor, Georgie tossed the album onto the Spider's passenger seat for later and headed away from the homestead. Page 139. Chapter 17. A white Toyota utility came up the driveway as she drove down. There wasn't enough room to pass, and the other driver didn't pull over. Georgie waited for him to reverse and found herself in a standoff. Two men glowered through their windscreen. They alighted but didn't approach. Georgie sighed and hopped out. A blue heeler barreled up and landed heavy paws on her chest. She collapsed onto her butt. She eyeballed the dog, pinned more by his snappy jaw and freaky one blue one brown-eyed glare than his weight. Trigger, one of the men commanded. Off. The dog snapped again, extracted his paws and retreated to his master's side. The older man shuffled forward and stretched a hand to Georgie. He pulled her upright, squashing her fingers. Hands still trapped, she scanned up to his face. Tight mouth, cold stare, weather-beaten skin, florid and veined. He had a build to match the dog, only very tall, squeezed into khaki overalls and topped with close-cut grey hair. Help you, he belatedly released his grip. Georgie fed him the story she'd told the Pattersons. The man's expression transformed to a beam. Thought you was from the bank. Georgie pictured her thongs, jeans and tank and suppressed a grin. This guy's not too sharp. Roger, the older guy pointed a thumb to his chest. And this here's me son. Page 140. Mick. Abigail D's lessees. They each pumped a handshake, and Georgie winced at duplicate hand crushes then brushed off her butt. Trigger snoozed in the shade of the Spider, and the men lolled against their ute. Mrs. P took off last weekend. She told me and me boy, Mick here, that she'd be away a couple of days. Expected her back before now. Not like her to go off for more than a day or two. She likes it here. Roger waved a vague hand at the property. Mick agreed, drawing Georgie's attention to him. She noted an uncanny resemblance between the father and son, including drinkers' complexions and strong Ocker accents. Still, it's up to her, Roger continued. Not for us to say anything. Pretty lonely for her since Mr. P went. Do you know how I can contact Susan's friend, Jack? It's possible she's staying with him, if she's not with Margaret. I dunno which Jack Mrs. P would be visitin'. Don't seem proper. She's married to Mr. P. Roger's eyes hardened. Georgie suggested, perhaps he's a relative. Both men shrugged, but the father continued to be the spokesman. Don't ring any bells with me. Great. Will my next question be a dud too? Do you think her being away has anything to do with Rowley? Suddenly, the men's thick necks retracted. Dour lines replaced all trace of the farmer's grins. She frowned, confused and intrigued. What ya mean? Roger asked. Well, Rowley goes missing, and then almost to the day 5 years later, Susan takes off. More than coincidence, do you think? Roger lifted his shoulders. Mick scratched his scalp with long, jagged fingernails. Why have they gone shifty? Her writer's instincts fired, as did her questions. Page 141. What do you think happened to Rowley? I dunno, Roger muttered. Do you think he's dead? The man yelled. I said, I dunno. Trigger growled. Mick put a hand on his collar. Georgie felt a trickle of fear but persisted. Why do you think Rowley disappeared? Mick bent forward, yanking the dog, and stuck his nose close. So close that she could smell beer and bad breath. He jabbed a finger into her collarbone, pounded at the same spot until her eyes smarted and heart thudded. Show no fear, don't back down. Dad said he dunno. We can't tell you nothin'. Stop being a nosy bitch and get out of here. She battled an impulse to fight back. There were times and places to take on adversaries. This wasn't one of them. The farm was secluded, and she was outnumbered by two giants and their mongrel. To Georgie's relief, Mick stepped back. She moved to the Spider with faux calm. Roger reversed the ute until she had room to pass. Grateful to leave Abigail D behind, she wiped damp palms on her jeans and turned onto Howlong Road. When the tires gripped tarmac, she accelerated and tried to persuade herself that she'd imagined the farmer's violent response. She failed. And grew even more convinced that Rowley's demise drove Susan's actions. Franklin zipped past the cop shop hoping none of his workmates spotted him. He parked the bike on the low side of Camp Street and well off the road, next to a vintage Suzuki GT 750. Each time he saw the glossy teal Juco offset by masses of chrome, it almost tempted him to trade the Ninja for an old classic. But he'd never do it. Past her, Franklin stepped through the arched entrance and into the foyer of Page 142. The former Baptist church. Music, together with the clatter of crockery, drew him through to the kitchen. A funky song about Jesus played loudly. The pastor sang along even louder and washed coffee cups. Franklin called out again rather than spring a surprise. Frankie. Pastor Danny pivoted to face him. Her cheeks popped out with her broad smile, making the million freckles on her face more prominent. She looked about Cat's age but actually fell closer to his own. She gave him a hug that squeezed the air from his lungs and brought on an attack of guilt. He and Danny could be good friends if he made an effort. They had plenty in common from motorbikes to their football team and didn't have to worry about that traditional male-female impossibility of a platonic friendship. Danny wasn't just one of the very few female church clergy in the country. She and the other lesbian pastors could probably be counted on one hand. Coffee, Frankie. Can I pick your brain too? She tilted her head and punched his arm lightly. Then the pastor brightened his day with another 100-watt smile. Afternoon, can I get you a cuppa? Georgie surveyed Lewis Davis across the desk. Dressed in a cheap suit, he could have passed for a farmer on church day. His manner was effusive and assessing, yet amiable too. The real estate manager possessed an X factor beyond Pam Stewart's character reference and the fact that he was one of Rowley Pentecost's best mates. Georgie accepted and rested elbows on the desk while she waited. Her head felt heavy with sudden fatigue. So much driving, so much thinking, my brain hurts. Is it all a waste of time? She watched Davis weave through the overcrowded office, 2 mugs hooked on one hand, packet of biscuits in the other, amazed by the large man's graceful. Page 143. Gate. Interest you in a bicky? He proffered a packet of Tim Tams. Georgie shook her head, appetite depleted by the biscuits from Susan's kitchen and the croissant Pam Stewart had pressed on her as she recapped the morning. So you're a friend of Pam's? Davis asked. Crumbs fell from the side of his mouth and sprinkled his soup with cookie dandruff. Kind of, yes. She explained how they'd met and the purpose of her visit now. Davis's smile stretched his face but no longer reached his eyes. They became dead fish eyes. You said yourself that Susan made arrangements with her neighbors and told Mick and Roger she was going away. And that there's every chance she's with her niece. Well, yes. So, what are you really doing here? He sounded tired. She didn't know what to say. What do you hope to gain by dredging up the past? His voice took a harsh edge that made his smile creepy. I just thought. No, he said, leaning forward. The facade of a smile dropped. That's the problem. I don't think you've thought about this at all. Aren't you worried about Susan? Georgie asked incredulously. Not from what you've told me, no. But if you're going to set things off again and she's going to come back to, well, the whole Rowley thing all over again, then yes. And I'll hold you personally responsible. Davis stood and snatched her half-full mug. He stalked into the back office. Georgie felt the curious gaze of the receptionist as she left. I'm after some scuttlebutt. Well, I knew you weren't here for Bible studies. Page 144. They sipped coffee, chewed biscuits and shared a smile. Franklin said, I'm working a case with a religious element in a series of poison pen letters, threats, really. The language is old-fashioned and sounds like it's out of a Bible. Maybe you need Bible studies after all. He tipped forward on his chair. No, what I need is any inside knowledge on religious nutters in our area. You've thought of old Art Hammer, of course. Yep, he's a definite possibility, but I can't track him down. I haven't seen him in a while either, but I was away for the clerical conference in Sydney last month, remember, and just this week had a course on in Melbourne. Pastor Danny scratched the side of her mouth. Are you going to eat that last bicky? And here I was thinking you were about to break my case. Chocolate helps me think. He passed the plate. Confidentially, the letters are nut jobs against unmarried mums. I reckon an old bloke's behind them. Someone deeply religious who thinks women should be kept in their place. It's real old school stuff, so maybe you've had trouble with him too. Because I'm female, lesbian or a pastor of the community church. All three, Franklin admitted. Our fellow's a traditionalist, and I can't see him here. He waved at the coffee urn but broadly meant the progressive religion and Danny's congregation. But he might have let you know he doesn't like the way your church does things. The pastor nodded. I see what you mean. She stood. The leather of her biker boots creaked. And I may be able to help. It had been a fuck day, so far. No joy with the niece. A bunch of reading material on Victoria's underworld. A whole lot of aggro from Mick and Roger. And now Georgie had upset one of Rowley's best mates. Page 145. What if he was right? What if Susan returned from a sojourn with her niece to find the whole Rowley thing, as Davis put it, back on the agenda, along with her own life under scrutiny? Georgie knocked a cigarette from the packet. She leaned against the shop window and smoked 2 in succession, but it was mechanical rather than enjoyable. She took the last drag and crushed the butt with her heel. Throughout, She'd focused on a 2-story Tudor-style red brick building opposite the Springs real estate. I'm right, there's plenty to be worried about. The banking chamber held one customer and 3 staff members in air hostess uniforms. The customer and teller joked and chatted. The other 2 bank officers spoke in hushed tones under the swinging information sign. Georgie approached and waited. Goosebumps pricked her skin. The temperature and an ambient odor reminded her of the inside of a fridge. The staff still ignored her. She cleared her throat and the younger woman glanced over. Oh, hello, sorry, we didn't see you there. How can I help? Douglas McDougal, please. Do you have an appointment? The woman asked, rising. No, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sure the manager will see you. Back in a tick. It wasn't easy to kill time in a bank. Unlike in a doctor's surgery, there weren't even back-issue magazines to flick through. The hairs on Georgie's arms stood to attention from the cold now, and she spent a minute in contemplation of those fine strands before she sought other distractions. She was spinning a brochure carousel when a telephone buzzed. Welcome to ANZ Bank, this is Carol, the woman who had thus far ignored Georgie said. Oh, it's you, hang on, I'll ask. Excuse me, miss, can I have your name? Georgie Harvey. Carol repeated it into the receiver and paused. Oh, yeah, she hung up. Page 146. Georgie arched a brow, but the banker ducked her head. The other officer returned and regarded Georgie awkwardly. She jiggled on the spot and said, I'm sorry, Ms. Harvey. Mr. McDougal isn't in the office. Bullshit. Georgie frowned. If you leave your number, I'm sure he'll give you a call. When he comes in. On the steps outside the building, Georgie decided that McDougal wouldn't call. She contemplated his avoidance and could only think that his good mate Lewis Davis had seen her head for the bank and warned him. Why? What are they hiding? Page 147. Chapter 18. Franklin mounted his motorbike and rode to the top of Wombat Hill. Throughout the short trip he churned over the morning's meeting with Kathy Jones. It couldn't compensate for her rape, but he vowed to catch the sadist Solomon before the sicko destroyed her self-esteem. One step at a time. He sat at a picnic table with notepad ready. How to handle Pastor Danny's information hadn't solidified yet. He'd chew that over while he made his first call from the mobile. The registrar cross-referenced staff on the ward while Renee and Kathy were at Ballarat base with the original list for Taylor and Lauren's stay. There were a handful of common names on the nursing team. The 3 she'd spoken to yesterday, along with 4 other midwives, one who'd retired at the end of February and another whose round-the-world long service leave jaunt began in March. That left 2 nurses with realistic opportunity. On top of this he had a list of doctors and aides to the maternity ward. But what was the motive for any of these? Forget motive for now, begin with the means. So the list grew. Unfortunately, just 2 were rostered on, and the registrar's talks with them were in fits and starts around a difficult labor and an anxious mother-to-be with Braxton Hicks contractions. Both seemed to be non-starters. No further enlightened, Franklin feared subsequent inquiries at the hospital. Page 148. Would prove equally time-consuming and fruitless. Right, time for the new and improved theory. The next number he dialed was a local one, the Blue family from Gugu Road. His day of frustrations continued when he reached an answering machine. He left a carefully worded message that requested El Blue or his parents return his call. Franklin toyed with the photo Pastor Danny had given him. An unsmiling pasty-faced youth in a wanker gangster hat, and buttoned collared shirt over t-shirt. This was not the portrait he'd expected of Solomon. And Danny had said, he doesn't fit your profile exactly. He's much younger than what you're thinking, only 17. But he could be your poison pen writer. Skeptical, Franklin's eyebrows had risen. She passed the photo and pointed at the kid in the forefront. El Blue joined us early last year. He came across as wonderful at first, friendly, helpful, kind, and we actually thought he'd make a great pastor. But after he ingratiated himself into the church and leadership group, he started to flex his muscles just a little too much in the youth group. How so? He started spouting some Old Testament scripture. His behavior became more and more zealous. He told the girls to dress less provocatively, and these girls don't show a bra strap or singlet, let alone cleavage. Then he got angry, scary angry, when things didn't go his way or people disagreed with him. By that stage, we realized he'd come into the church to disrupt and maybe destroy it from within. So despite his young age, El Blue matched most of Franklin's profile. But he'd hit another snag. His 2 red-hot suspects were both AWOL, and he was left in a holding pattern. Franklin arrived at the station with minutes to spare. He was rostered on 2 up. Page 149. With Scott Hart, who agreed to kick off their 4 to midnight stint playing catch-up on their respective portfolios. In addition to general duties and handling files for other branches or the Bacchus-Marsh detectives, each officer held an area of responsibility to take the strain off Lunny. Franklin looked after youth liaison, which included organizing community events like blue light discos, camps and outings, and the social club. Harty had the station portfolio, which roped in bail reports, station cameras and logs, but because he was young and keen, he often worked on the rosters and cleaned the police vehicles as well. Vehicles suggested a larger fleet than their one permanent four-wheel drive, any loaners they were lucky to have from another station, and a bunch of push bikes. The joys of a 16-hour country station. As Harty checked the bail records in the watch house, Franklin called Lauren Morris. He detailed developments with Renee Archer and Kathy Jones, except for Kathy's sexual assault. After reciting Solomon's latest letter, he said, "It struck Kathy and me that the letters could be quotes from the Bible. For sure, read the newest back slowly. I want to write it down." She considered the script and commented, "This one's extreme, isn't it?" There was another pause, then she added, "It's even more old-fashioned than ours. Do you think they're quotes from the Old Testament?" That tallied with his thoughts, and equally fit both Art Hammer's impromptu sermon style and Elblue, according to Pastor Danny. "Why don't Taylor and I see what we can come up with?" Franklin grinned, happy to shift responsibility. His idea of fun wasn't poring over a Bible. He scrawled notes into the daybook, then noticed the last thing on his to-do list. It made his stomach flip. "Hoi, Harty," he called down the short corridor. His buddy appeared in the doorway seconds later. "Yo. Let's take a ride out to Abigaildy to check on Susan Pentecost." "Aha, following up your girlfriend's report, are we?" Franklin hurled his Akubra-style police hat. Harty ducked. "That's a bit disrespectful, isn't it?" He retrieved the hat and page 150. Brushed it off. "They're the stupidest things they've brought out," Franklin replied as they jostled down the hallway. "Just as well they've issued us with caps then. Gotta keep grumpy old farts like you happy." Harty didn't have a chance to dodge Franklin's backhander too. The gut. Lunny entered the station. "I could have you on report for that," he said with mock severity. "Nice get up, boss." Franklin gestured towards Lunny's navy tracksuit and white runners. "Pretend I'm not here," was the airy reply. "Couple of matters to clear up. Maeve's sister isn't down again, by chance?" Harty asked. Lunny's blush confirmed his least favorite sister-in-law was in residence at the station house next door. Luckily, her visits were as brief as they were frequent. Are we still on for fishing tomorrow, John?" The sergeant's voice held a note of panic. Tempted to stir him by saying he'd swapped his rest day with one of the other blokes, Franklin took pity and nodded. "I'm driving," he told Harty, snagging the keys from the board. "Dam's full," Harty commented as they pulled up the farm's driveway. It's strange to have so much rain and see everything green in autumn, isn't?" "Yeah, but good strange." Franklin nodded at the distinction. "Easter's only a couple of weeks away." "Yes." His mate agreed. "It's funny, isn't it, that we've got so used to drought and Easters when the fire season's still in force that we've forgotten other years when it rained all." Page 151. Long weekend and was cold enough to freeze your balls off. It's still bloody hot now, though. Mick and Roger waved as they drove past. The farmers wore sweat-soaked khaki overalls over bare torsos as they strained fencing wire on the top paddock. The cops slipped through the white picket fence up at the house and side. The shade of the cypress windbreak gave welcome relief. "These look a bit sick." On the veranda, Harty crumbled dry soil from a potted plant between his fingers. He touched a rose leaf, which crackled before falling off. "They need a drink." "You're not wrong," Franklin said. It was uncharacteristic of green-thumbed Susan Pentecost to neglect her plants. Even after Rolly's disappearance, she'd overseen the care of all plants on Abigaildy's house block, along with the stock and crops, until she recovered enough to personally tend them. He remembered calling here with his former sergeant, Bill Noonan, after Susan's release from hospital. They'd found her with watering can in hand, fussing over foliage not half as withered as these rose bushes. Surely she'd have arranged for someone to water the plants if she'd planned this holiday. Perhaps she'd left in haste or never expected to stay away so long. The two men matched strides to the kitchen door and entered, calling, "Susan." No response. Harty gestured with a head twitch and Franklin nodded. Words were unnecessary. They did a swift inspection. In the study, Harty said, "Who's been a bit creative here?" He threw a notepad from the desk to Franklin, who examined the doodles. There were spirals and three-dimensional cubes and grim faces. Among the artwork were random words, several in block letters, others in a thready, rightward slanted script, but all similar enough to belong to one writer. Susan, niece, Rolly Susan Link, Jack, holiday, where, he read aloud, got to be the work of that Georgie Harvey bird, don't you think? His partner played devil's advocate. Not necessarily. Bit cheeky, walking in and making her. Page 152. What, a bit like us, you mean? Franklin grimaced. We're cops on a welfare check, and she's a civvy who shouldn't have just waltzed in. Not the same thing, he motioned to the pad. I don't suppose she meant to leave this behind. She mightn't have noticed she'd done it. I got into a bad habit at uni and doodle all the time. It's not until later that I realize what I've done. I wouldn't know about that. Franklin swatted his mate. Some of us are ordinary working class coppers, not brainy upstarts. Hardy, ha, ha, hey, do you reckon that's weird? Hardy pointed to the bookcase. Franklin noted the perfect alignment of the books on 6 of the 7 shelves. They were in ascending order according to height, each spine plumb. The bottom shelf held the tallest volumes and replicated the order above until midway along. There, several books collapsed across a gap corresponding to a couple of absent ones. Notice a few big books lying around. Yay high, he spread his hands a foot apart. Nothing in here, Hardy said. Check the bedrooms, I'll take the other rooms. They regrouped minutes later. Anything? No, and I wouldn't be surprised if Harvey's taken something from Susan's bedside table. There's not much dust on the surfaces, considering the gravel road and all, but what's has been stirred up? Harvey's pissing me off, Franklin complained. It's one thing letting yourself in to have a quick look-see, but filching Susan's gear is pretty rich, his friend agreed. Then he added, it's always possible that Susan took the books with her. I suppose, Franklin conceded. Get Mick and Roger in here for a chat. While his partner summoned the farmers, Franklin pulled out his ringing mobile. Constable Franklin. Senior constable, but he let it go. A couple more words and he'd identify her. Page 153. Caller with her very familiar voice. Don't tell me. She said, it's Christina Van Hokel here. Damn, I was so close. I'm ringing about the, incident with my car the other day. Oh, Franklin said, intrigued. I want to drop it. He let the silence sit, then asked, why's that? Oh, it's just kids. Her attempt at casual fell short. Their parents will sort them out. No need to get them in trouble with police. Is that right? Well, it's gone too far now. Even if you were to withdraw your complaint. It hadn't. He just wanted to gauge her reaction. You can't do that, she shouted. Then added softly, can you? I'm not sure, Christina. I'll have to get back to you. He called off, chuckling. Let her sweat for a few days, then he'd pop over and see if she was ready to come clean. He intended to find out why she'd lied. Franklin was still grinning when he greeted Mick and Roger with handshakes and backslaps. Trigger trotted behind them and collapsed with a sigh onto the mat by the stove. We was tellin' Scott here, Roger pointed at Harty, that we had a Sheila nossin' about today. Didn't we, Mick? His son bobbed his head. Get her name, did you, Roger? Franklin asked. Georgie somethink. Harvey. Yep, the older man clicked his fingers. Anyhow, she had a cock and bull story about Mrs. P. But we reckon she was really cassin' the joint. How's that? Mick puffed out his cheeks but let his dad speak. Page 154. Well, it's not like Mrs. P to go away for more than a couple of days, like. But it's up to her, isn't it? Not like she's had many holidays, especially since Mr. P went. Susan told you she was going on a holiday. Father and son nodded. Where was she going? Dunno. Say when she was coming back. Nup. You worried about her? Nup. This Georgie Harvey, what do you think she was up to? You know, cassin' the joint. That's what they call it, isn't it? Checking it out before they rip the place off. Franklin shot a glance at Harty, who raised an eyebrow and gave a slight headshake. He hadn't mentioned the possible theft. You'd better have a look then and see if anything's missing. Take your time. He rued his words as Mick and Roger took an age to check each room. Their voices became excited in the main bedroom. The officers joined them. Mrs. P's photos are gone. Harty took down details and trailed his partner and the farmers into the study. That don't seem right, Mick said to his father. He pointed to the bottom of the bookcase. Roger knelt, knees groaning. He thrust away Trigger's snout and pushed up the leaning books. He considered the thickness of the gap, measured it with his thumb and fingers. With a scratch to his chin, he said, there's something missin'. Mrs. P has these special books with real nice leather covers. Thick ones they are, that right, Mick? Come on, stop dithering. Think. Oh, Dad. Page 155. By G's, Mick, Roger Rose. Her books are missing, no doubt about it. She always has. M on the shelf there or on the desk here. Nowhere else. That Sheila's stolen Mrs. P's things, hasn't she? Artie excused himself and left the room. Franklin held up a hand to diffuse Roger's anger. Leave it with us, we'll check it out. What else did you discuss with Georgie Harvey? Nothing, the father said quickly. Did she give you an idea where she was going after here? Nope, Mick replied. Mate, Artie interrupted, we've got an urgent job. Franklin was poised to jump into the police truck when his mobile rang again. He threw the keys to his partner and answered the call while buckling into the passenger seat. Lauren Morris sounded excited. Hart flicked on strobe lights and siren. He negotiated the gravel driveway, turned onto Grimwell's Road and white-knuckled the steering wheel. Franklin gritted his teeth as the four-wheel drive bumped over corrugations. He listened to Lauren. It depends on which version of the Bible you use. I dug up an old one and found sections in the book of Proverbs that sound a lot like Solomon. Chapter 5, verses 3 to 4 say, For the lips of a strange woman drop as an honeycomb, and her mouth is smoother than oil, but her end is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Don't you think that's similar to Solomon saying, Your end will be bitter? He agreed, and she continued. Verse 5 says, Her feet go down to death, her steps take hold on hell. Remember, Solomon said, Be damned to follow their whoremother's steps. Page 156. Down to death, in the latest letter, and, you and your bastard walk the road of death, in the one we got. Verse 8. They hit a pothole. Franklin's head bumped the side window. He cursed, righted himself and his daybook. Sorry, go on, Lauren. 8 says, Remove thy way far from her, and come not nigh the door of her house. Very close to Solomon's, be tempted not to the door of a stranger, or tempt a stranger to your door. Then 15 is, Drink waters out of thine own cistern, and running waters out of thine own well. That makes me think of drinking out of a toilet cistern. Yuck, but it's all sounding a bit familiar, isn't it? We're not far away, Hart interjected. Despite the blind corner ahead, they could see a plume of smoke. Sorry, Lauren, we're on our way to an emergency. Can you give me the rest quickly? Okay, she sped up, 18 to 20, Let thy fountain be blessed, and rejoice with the wife of thy youth. Let her be as the loving hind and pleasant roe, let her breast satisfy thee at all times, and be thou ravished always with her love. And why wilt thou, my son, be ravished with a strange woman, and embrace the bosom of a stranger? That ties with, you must lie only with your husband, and the whole stranger reference in Solomon's letter to Kathy. Franklin could hear a distant wail, even above their siren, radio and Hart's occasional exclamation. An ambulance or fire truck was on its way to the collision too. Lauren continued, Chapter 6 of Proverbs says, These 6 things doth the Lord hate, yea, 7 are an abomination unto him. One of those being, to keep thee from the evil woman, from the flattery of the tongue of a strange woman. Pretty similar to Solomon's, the Lord hates the ways of evil people. Proverbs goes on and on about adultery and prostitution, but I think. Page 157. Solomon's twisting the words to suit their own agenda and roping in whatever they consider being contrary to a righteous or virtuous woman. I mean, all they've got against us is that we're unmarried mums, except Renee, who is married. I don't think any of us are cheating on our partners with another guy, married or not. We wouldn't have the energy, for starters. Anyway, I could find dozens of references in Proverbs alone that have strong links to Solomon's letters. These are just a few examples. And there's also a lot of weird capitalization in the Bible, whole words or the first letter of words that are mid-sentence and don't need a capital. It all ties together, Franklin agreed. He felt heart tense. He did likewise. They were a few kilometers from the crash scene, but an approaching clearance would give them a glimpse. The person who'd called in the accident had done so anonymously before fleeing, which meant they were ignorant as to the number of casualties and extent of injuries or fatalities. Merely that it was serious and there's blood everywhere. So, basically Solomon seems to be using an oldish version of the Bible as a source for the letters, Lauren said. Or their memory, I guess. Could be a priest, a parishioner or anyone familiar with the Bible, active churchgoer or not. All we know is that they're religious, fanatical even, and Christian. Her excitement diminished. I suppose we haven't narrowed it down at all. Her. Although her research did only endorse current theories, Franklin reassured. Franklin viewed the destruction ahead with clenched guts. A minivan on its side, engulfed in flames, it had sparked a grass fire that seared a stripe through the adjacent paddock. Nearby, a sedan with a piano accordion front end. It must have flipped, judging by its battered bonnet and roof. Page 158. Debris scattered in no sign of life. Every direction. Page 159. Chapter 19. Georgie's pulse quickened when the bumblebee sang. She dug out the mobile but didn't recognize the number. No Ballarat or Dalesford prefix, probably not Margaret Pentecost or Good News on Susan. Hello. Georgie. It was Michael Padley. His voice sounded strained. There was lots of background noise. Michael, is everything all right? Number, it's Ruby. Georgie sucked in a breath. Felt afraid to ask. She's. Please, fuck, don't let it be the worst. She had another turn. He sounded 1,000 miles away. Had. Georgie squeezed her eyes, blinking back calls. A lump jammed her throat. Death had touched Georgie before. She'd found the body of her first cat. Bloodied and broken, killed by a careless driver. Heartbroken and naive, she believed she'd never recover, nor experience worse. Georgie, are you there? She couldn't speak, now lost in the time of her grandmother's passing, expected and peaceful yet still painful. Her memories darkened further. She was holding her dad's hand. Page 160. Overwhelmed when she felt a weak squeeze, she watched him try to speak, then heard the death rattle. A bittersweet moment, at last, release from the tentacles of the brain tumor, while that final goodbye twisted her heart into a corkscrew. Can you come, please? Michael's voice was tiny, bewildered, so sad. The corkscrew skewered again. Ruby and Michael were quasi-grandparents. Neglected but brimming with unconditional love. Ruby couldn't be dead. Last week she'd been excited about a play her friends were about to open and had dyed her hair siren red. Don't ask me to see Ruby's body. I'll scream, right here, on the main street of Dalesford. He said, are you there? Yes, she whispered. She verged on puking, exacerbated by a billow of black diesel fumes from a light truck as it passed. Can you come straight away? Of course, but She stopped before naming her location, the trigger for Ruby's heart failure. It will take me a while. Oh, Michael sounded hurt. Ruby will. You mean she's back in intensive care? I'm so worried. They won't let me see her. Georgie nearly laughed. Intensive care meant alive, not well but still kicking. She sprinted for the spider, assuring Michael she'd be there soon. But she cringed at the lie. Her return to Melbourne could take up to 2 hours if she clashed with commuters. Georgie rummaged for her keys. She upended her bag on the pavement, scattered the contents. Key wedged into ignition, mobile into cradle, she shifted into reverse and noticed a flyer stuffed under her windscreen wiper. Damn it. She jumped out, pulled the flyer, dumped it on the passenger seat and gunned. Page 161. The engine. Take 2. She pressed a speed dial number, reversed, almost collided with a car behind. The call was answered, and Georgie announced herself. Fuck. She went into a queue. Come on, come on. She cursed the operatic on hold music, tapped her steering wheel, floored the car. I think Adam's finishing off his call, his PA said cheerfully. Care to hold a little longer, Georgie? Yes, she ground her teeth. George. Finally. AJ, I might lose you. Reception's not great here. She filled him in on Michael's call. I can't get there for an hour or so. She hit a rut at 130 kilometers per hour. The steering wheel jolted. Where are you? He yelled over her curses. Just out of Dalesford. Again, why? Not now. 3 seconds on, she cut his aggrieved silence. AJ, save the bullshit for later. Can you take care of Michael until I get there? He promised. She disconnected, honked at a slow-moving tractor. She pulled out and passed, narrowly missing an oncoming station wagon. Rammed the accelerator, demanded that any god listening keep her safe from cops and radars. Time stretched. Her hands ached from death gripping the wheel. Eyeballs stung, stomach churned. Still a long way to go. She raced to the hospital. Every risk worth it, every minute a waste. Page 162. Georgie circled and swooped on a parking space. She dropped her keys while locking the spider and tripped at the entrance to the Alfred. She located AJ and Michael, her eyes bugging to stop tears. No news, AJ said. He hugged her tight. That's something, she replied as they clung together for a moment. She sat next to Michael. She clasped his gnarled, shaking hand. AJ perched on an identical hard plastic seat on the old man's other side. Michael shrank as the minutes ticked. The pain in Georgie's chest ballooned. Hours passed. At 9:05 p.m., a white-coated woman approached. Mr. Padley, I'm Dr. Quinter. After quick handshakes and introductions all round, the doctor told Michael, "Your wife will have to undergo more tests, but she's stable and out of immediate danger." They cheered. Quinta crouched before Michael and took his hands. "You're not going to be much use to Ruby unless you take care of yourself. Why don't you go home and rest? She'll sleep through the night and you can see her in the morning." Michael argued but eventually allowed Georgie and AJ to lead him from the hospital. They tucked him into their sofa bed and saw him fall into an exhausted, uneasy slumber. Sleep wouldn't come to Georgie. She sat by Michael's bedside until dawn cracked. The angst returned, the tightness in her chest, the shake in her hands and... Page 163. Of course, the tears, all back. In reflection, there was no mystery to why she felt poorly. It came down to the day looming on the calendar, yet not signifying an end. This onset of frailty was simply a symptom of her sadness. Not just sadness but signs too of her loneliness, anger and, yes, pure unchristian rage at the unknown, although not for retribution. A greater being would delve out justice in due course. She pushed her hands onto her knees to stop the trembles. Young ones favored the term closure these days. At first, she'd balked. Why shut the door on the best part of her life? But lately, she'd tried the word out, when alone or talking to God. She had an idea how to find closure. It was worth trying, for what else could she do? What did she have to lose? Page 164. Wednesday the 17th of March. Page 165. Chapter 20. I can't believe you lied to me. I didn't lie. George, it's a lie by omission and we both know it. AJ. Don't try to wheedle back into my good books. Keep it down, Michael will be back in a minute. Their neighbor had gone home to bathe where he had the safety features of grab rails and stepless shower. You should have told me what you were up to. AJ's voice was quiet but sharp. All I've done is check out a few things for Ruby to try to find her friend. It's the way you've gone about it. I mean, for fuck's sake, you broke into this woman's house and stole stuff from her. I didn't break in. Only on a technicality. Their volume had cranked up again. And I didn't steal anything. I borrowed a few items. I'm sure Susan wouldn't object. What if this Lewis Davis is right? What if she comes back from a holiday to find you've been nosing around, asking a whole lot of people a whole lot of questions and dredging up all this history involving her husband? For fuck's sake, he swore again, something AJ wasn't prone to. Didn't you stop to think? Page 166. Yes, I did stop and think. AJ's mouth flapped, but she overrode him. I stopped to think about everything she tossed her head in the direction of the Pudley's home, done for us. I thought about how worried Ruby was and how that's completely out of character. I tried to reach Susan Pentecost on the phone. Couldn't. Thought, what should I do next? So I drove to bloody Hepburn and checked things out. And I ended up with, as you said, a whole lot of questions. Which you're not equipped to handle. Georgie snarled at him before she continued. Then Ruby had a bloody heart attack because she's so frantic and I promised her through Michael, that I'd see this through. Thinking Ruby'll get better faster if I prove her mate's okay. And don't forget I went to the cops. Is it my fault they're dickheads? She glared. He returned it. Yes but. She cut him off, so then I contacted a few of Susan's acquaintances, tried to see her niece. I've thought long and fucking hard about everything I've done over the past few days. Georgie's chest heaved. They still faced off. Several minutes elapsed. AJ grew less irate, and Georgie experienced a sense of disassociation. She disconnected from her body. Her hearing dulled. He asked something. His lips moved like a bad soundtrack dub, out of time with his voice. What? She focused, and the numbness ebbed. What else haven't you told me? Georgie crossed her fingers. Nothing. This was not the right juncture to discuss fears for their future. He'd be shattered that she'd shared intimacies of their relationship with Pam. AJ's posture relaxed. She exhaled. He said, maybe I overreacted. Tell me everything again from the beginning. Page 167. They perched on the end of the bed that Georgie had barely slept in overnight. Her story stammered at first. Once it flowed, even with AJ twice interrupting to probe facts, she strayed little. What now? He queried when she fell silent. Well, today I'm going to ring Susan and her niece until my fingers fall off or I reach one of them. I've got a meeting with David Ruddick AL, to workshop that script I've been struggling over, then a rewrite, I'd say. After that, if I'm lucky, I'll skim over the latest stuff I borrowed from Susan Pentecost. And then I'll work on a plan for tomorrow. AJ nodded. I suspect that'll include another trip to Hicksville and more digging. It's bloody frustrating that I can't do much today. You know I can't take time off, he started. Georgie did a hand flap. It's not a two-man job. It was one thing yesterday, but a different thing altogether today. I get it, don't worry. She knocked his knee. I can take care of myself. A couple of pushy farmers don't scare me. Me, big tough woman. She did a Tarzan beat to her chest. They both spat out a laugh. The front door closed, and Michael's walking stick tap shuffle signaled his return. We'll keep this quiet, she whispered. Michael has enough to cope with. AJ kissed her. You're stressed about Susan, aren't you? Yep, not quite as much as I am for Ruby, but, Georgie paused, assailed by emotion. This isn't a half-assed effort to find a distant mate of Ruby's anymore. There's Pam too, she's gorgeous, and we're talking about her best pal. Besides, and this might be hard to understand because I only know her secondhand, Susan's grown on me. It may sound corny, but she's become like an old family friend. Page 168. Breakfast was coffee and a cigarette for Georgie, toast and cereal for the men. Neither objected to her smoking at the open window above the sink, although normally they would. Each coped with their anxiety uniquely. Michael chatted like a 5-year-old who'd drunk too much red cordial, Georgie retreated into herself, and AJ acted the over-attentive host. He moved towards the wreckage. The heat and intensity of the flames engulfing the minivan almost drove him back. Dreading what he would find, he approached with a raised hand, palm forward, shielding his face. Locked in a vacuum, nothing but his own breathing penetrated his psyche. As his stride became a jog, he emerged from the void. He could hear Hart on the portable radio, close to his heels. In his peripheral vision, he noted the simultaneous arrival of an ambulance and fire truck. Then he realized he was yelling at the mangled and burning masses, urging any survivors to respond. Torn between which vehicle to check, he saw the fireys and ambos rush to the minivan. He swallowed hard and tried to force the driver's door of the sedan. A man turned towards him. Blood poured from a gash on his forehead. His deathly white face contorted. A quick glance told him the front end had rammed into the car's cockpit. The dash and steering column pinned the man's legs. He pulled again on the door, eyes fixed on the strained face. It didn't budge. He pressed his hand against the glass of the driver's window. Felt helpless. The man gasped and his breath turned to rapid pants. He thrashed and sobbed words but didn't make sense. His ghostly skin highlighted the dilated brown pupils and bloodshot whites of his eyes. Tears streaked his cheeks and ran into his open blue lips. The driver writhed and gestured with a bloodied hand into the distance. He released an ear-piercing scream merged with two comprehensible words, "My son," and dropped unconscious. Page 169. Franklin woke before he had to relive the rest of yesterday's nightmare smash. Sweat matted his chest hairs and, despite the warm morning, his bones ached with a pervasive chill. He clenched his eyes and shook his head to purge the devastating images. The man died in transit to Melbourne after the State Emergency Services crew freed him with the jaws of life. They tended to his 15-year-old son. Not wearing a seatbelt, on impact he'd catapulted through the Commodore's windscreen and landed on a fence post several meters from the wreck. It lethally impaled him through the spine and propelled his intestines through a massive cavity in his gut. The driver had been a local widower, the sole parent of 2 children, and now his daughter was orphaned at 13. It cut Franklin to the core that at only a few years younger than Kat she had lost her world. She'd need all the support of the community to survive this catastrophe. The passengers in the minibus fared better. Physically, at least. They were a group of adults with intellectual disability returning to Ballarat from a day trip at Hepburn Spa. The van flipped onto its side, fortunately its right face. A quick-thinking carer forced open the sliding door on the left and cleared his charges before the vehicle ignited. They then crouched in the shallows of the nearby dam, petrified by the grass fire. That they'd worn seatbelts saved their lives. They would soon recover from their contusions and abrasions, broken ribs and dislocations. The repercussion on their mental health was a question for the long haul. The bus driver wouldn't have to worry about emotional consequences. He died on impact, which might be a small comfort to his de facto wife over the weeks and months ahead. Franklin knew the crash would leave him with permanent scars. You can't help remove a kid staked to a fence post and be the same man you were before. Nor can you forget terrified adults huddled together and drenched in blood, their shrieks and moans inhuman. He'd worked casually at the abattoirs for extra income when Donna went on maternity leave. What he'd witnessed yesterday reminded him of the panic of animals at slaughter. Page 170. Shortly after Franklin and Hart's arrival, backup police units swarmed from Trentham, Ballon, Creswick and Ballarat, along with additional fire trucks and ambulances and several SES vehicles. Lunny materialized with a fluorescent police vest thrown over his tracksuit in haste. Much later, the 3 Dalesford policemen handed over the reins to the major collision investigation mob. Yet they knew the accident would spark a chain reaction that they would deal with long beyond the specialists leaving the scene. The skid marks at the crash site most distressed the cops. The MCI crew reckoned the anonymous witness had probably caused the tragedy, and that the bus driver, his passengers and the Wombat Flat family were all innocent victims. When the Dalesford boys left, the experts had only scratched the surface of the case. But if the preliminary call was substantiated, no one would rest until the bastard got his just desserts. Dad, Kat nudged the bedroom door. You awake? Yeah, come in. She entered with Vegemite-smeared toast and freshly plunged coffee. She placed the tray on his knees, perched on the side of the bed and scrutinized him. Father and daughter had exchanged roles of carer and charge. If the circumstances weren't so tragic, it'd be funny. I'm all right, Kat. You were talking in your sleep. I think you were crying, Dad. Come here. He opened his arms and they hugged, somehow not upturning the breakfast tray. A tear trailed Kat's nose. Franklin brushed it away with his thumb. He again said, I'm all right. It was horrible out there but it's all part of the job. Yeah, something like that. Aren't you going to be late for school? I thought you'd want company on your day off. Nice try. He slapped her arm lightly. You're going to school. I'm going. Page 171. Fishing with Lunny, so you don't need to worry. He tensed his abs and pummeled them. See, tough as nails. Yeah, right. Oh, good. We're back to normal. Teenage daughter is embarrassed by her father and giving cheek. She rose, laughing, and wiggled her fingers from the doorway. Kat departed and Franklin practiced his customary coping mechanism, keeping busy. He tuned the radio to a golden oldies station, volume to the max. He sang along loudly, showered and dressed. It wasn't pretty, as he couldn't hit the top notes intended to make up the lyrics, the tension dripped away. Who doesn't have a mobile or answering machine these days? Georgie dressed and paced, smoked and paced, dialed and paced, drank black coffee and paced. Now. She flicked her wrist, calculated Adge dropped Michael at the hospital by. She dialed Susan and Margaret again. She cursed, drank more scalding coffee and studied the wall clock. AJ would have reached his office on Lonsdale Street, right in the heart of the legal precinct. At 9:35 a.m., Michael rang as arranged and reported good news, a marked improvement in his wife. He still sounded like he was running on red cordial but quoted Dr. Quinter, saying she'll be fine. Then he admitted Ruby might need a bypass operation but hastily added that Quinter inclined towards beta blocker medication, rehab and radical lifestyle changes at this stage. After that, Michael returned to Ruby's bedside and Georgie resumed pacing. Something brushed Franklin's shoulder blade. Shit. He pivoted towards a sheepish Tim Lunny. Page 172. Sorry, the Sarge yelled over the music. I rang the doorbell. He dropped to speaking tone as Franklin turned down the radio. But you didn't hear me. Can I give you a word of advice? Franklin raised a brow. Don't give up your day job. Lunny chuckled as they climbed into his Monero coupe. Franklin stretched out his long legs and settled into the sculpted bucket seat. He inhaled the scents of leather cleaner and carpet deodorizer and reflected that the Monero was one of the few cars in which he enjoyed being a passenger. Although, driving the sporty V8 far surpassed passenger thrills, particularly through the curves of the little-used roads outbourne way. It matched in power and handling the unmarked Ford FPV GT a detective buddy let him sample. Awesome. Can't get over you lashing out on a swanky car at your age, he commented, as he'd done periodically since Lunny bought the coupe. It had been his own celebration gift when he was promoted to Sarge at Dalesford. Not that he was happy to see Bill Noonan go, none of them were. Ah, yes, one of the upsides to aging is that you can treat yourself instead of the kids. Once the kids leave home, that is. Well, I guess I have about 5 years to go then. Lunny snorted. Guess again. We didn't get rid of the last one until she turned 29. These days they often stay until their 40s. They drove without speaking through Hepburn Springs and snaked along the Hepburn Newstead Road with the Monero in its element. They powered past Breakneck Gorge. Near the turnoff for Howlong Road, Franklin wondered if Susan Pentecost had returned to Abigeldy. He dialed the farm. The call rang out. He tapped the mobile on his knee. Are you okay, John? You want to see a counselor? Lunny had misread his mood. Franklin cringed. The accident had been a shocker, but he'd cope. He couldn't imagine a scenario bad enough that he'd sit in a stuffy office, sharing his feelings with a shrink. No, I'm fine. Hearty might be a different story. Yesterday's smash would be his worst. Page 173. Melissa's going back to Melbourne tonight. Lunny referred to Hart's girlfriend, who commuted between Castlemaine and the city during her final year at university. If it's going to hit him, that'd be when. They brooded. Eventually, the Sarge asked, how about a debrief over a few snags and beers later, then? A bunch of mates, an excess of beer and plenty of dark humor. No blots on service records or shit stirring about seeing a shrink by cockheads like Wells. Definitely a better idea. Whatever, Franklin borrowed Kat's favorite phrase and shrugged. I was actually chewing over Susan Pentecost and the bird from Melbourne. Don't suppose there's any need to worry, though. Lunny agreed. They fell silent again and wound past a derelict cottage. Rusted iron peeled away from a veranda supported by leaning posts, and its deep-set rot somehow reflected Franklin's unease. Page 174. Chapter 21. Soon, they approached Cricket Willow in Shepherd's Flat, the birthplace of the Australian cricket bat. Its oval was an oasis nourished by purified sewage water. They pulled over moments later. Lunny was reluctant to drive his Monero off-road, even across the privately owned paddock adjacent to their favorite fishing spot on the Jim Crow. So they took the gear and secured the car before hoofing the last 500 meters. Lunny adjusted his grip on the esky and asked, have you ever regretted joining the cops? Surprised, Franklin glanced at his boss. Nope, you. If I'd been a boilermaker, as my dad wanted, I wouldn't have baggage from cases like yesterday's crash. Hard to switch off, isn't it? Franklin nodded and they trudged a few meters, inspecting the creek for a deep pool and the bank for a suitable clearing. They found the perfect place and grunted together. You wouldn't have enjoyed being a boilermaker. Probably true. What would you have done instead? I can't imagine doing anything else. No regrets, then. After a hesitation, Franklin admitted, a few. Donna for one, I don't think we should have got married so young. She hadn't tasted life enough and was never going to be happy being a copper's wife in a small town for long. And Kat tied her down. She wasn't ready for the whole deal. Page 175. Lunny cast and settled onto the bank, with his back against a knotted gum tree. What else? No, your turn. Lunny was quiet for several minutes, then sighed. I wish I'd traveled when I was young. You still can, you're not that old. Franklin grinned to take off the sting, especially on top of his earlier crack about the Monero. Maeve and I are considering a cruise next year. Fiji, no Umea. Lunny flicked his line and reeled it in. His bait had vanished, so he replenished the hook and recast. He said, you must be sick of Dalesford. Few of us can work in the same station as long as you have. 6 or 7 years and we generally get twitchy. Although, I must say, I'm in no hurry to leave, and I'm coming up for 8 years. More to the point, Maeve'd have my guts for garters if I put in for a transfer. He chuckled, then glanced at Franklin. 16 years, no. He shook his head. Why don't you go for your sergeant's stripes, mate? Franklin's line jolted. He pulled up. The rod arched away from the rigid line. He jerked. The line cleared the water. Catch of the day. Lunny chuckled again. Franklin jiggled his brows and removed a snagged stick. How about it? The older cop persisted. I'll put your name forward. If I was going for a promotion, it'd be for the suits, Franklin replied, then wished he'd kept his mouth shut. He'd never verbalized his ambition. A detective, huh? Well, why not? I'll put your name up. Franklin looked away. He watched the water trickle over pebbles and submerged branches. I think I've got a bite, Lunny said excitedly. He gave the rod a few twitches, checked his bait. No, false alarm. He reached into the esky and threw a beer to Franklin before popping one. What do you reckon? Will I have a chat with the district inspector and get it rolling? I can't leave Kat to do the course. And afterwards, I'd be posted who? Page 176. Knows where to start with and then have to wait for a vacancy in Ballarat or Bacchus Marsh to get back to the area. And even the too far away. It's ideal living and working here. I'm on the spot if Kat needs me. I get that it's hard being a single parent, John, Lunny interrupted. But you need a life too. I can't leave Kat, and it wouldn't be fair to uproot her. All her buddies are here, and it'd be a big mistake to move her in her senior years of school. It could stuff up her whole life. Lunny sighed. Can't talk you into it. Franklin shook his head, miserable. The Sarge switched subjects. Yesterday the worst you've been to. Accident. On Lunny's nod, Franklin replied decisively, no. The worst was a mate from the footy club who decided to take himself out. It would have been a couple of years before you transferred in. Smitty strapped himself and his 3 kids into his station wagon, then didn't steer or brake at the first bend with a decent drop. They crashed through the guardrail and shot over the edge. They reckon he flipped twice before smashing into a massive gum. That was bad. Those little kiddies didn't fucking deserve to die like that. It hit him afresh. The stench of petrol and blood overlaid by eucalyptus. They didn't deserve to die at all. Lunny violently swatted a fly. A few minutes passed before the Sarge spoke again. My worst was out at Box Hill. My first posting out of the academy and I was downright green. In my second month, I had 3 horrific weeks. In the first week, a man stepped in front of a train. It wasn't a suicide, but it was pretty gruesome. Then my partner and I copped a shotgun suicide. A young Turkish girl. The parents didn't have much English, which made the whole thing worse. The mother was distraught, and I couldn't find a way to make it any better. So I patted her back and left fast. The next bloomin' weekend, a little old lady got bumped crossing Maroondah Highway. Jesus, that was messy. The driver had a nervous breakdown, even though it wasn't his fault. The little old lady's time was up. He couldn't see it that way. Page 177. Imagine how hard he'd have taken it if he'd been drunk or speeding. I tell you what, Lunny said loudly. It's lucky I had Maeve to talk to. I very nearly left the force, thinking if this is what it's going to be like, I won't be able to cope. Ah, but you find your ways, don't you? Sure, you have to deal with it or get out. You're no good to anyone, least of all yourself, if you drag yourself in every day stressing over what's going to happen or carrying a chip on your shoulder. That goes for life generally, doesn't it? Yeah, and thank God most people couldn't do what Smitty did. Put it this way, it was pretty rough when Donna left, but I got over it for Kat. And because life's too short. They fished quietly. Franklin sensed that Lunny was more upset than he was willing to admit by yesterday's accident and in reliving the Box Hill horror too. Keep an eye on my line, John, the Sarge said. Franklin watched him retreat to the car. He returned composed and buoyant. Righto, my place for a barbie and drinks later. Artie will be back from Melissa's by change of shift, when Slam and Kong will be coming off. Irvy and Wellesley are on Arvo shift, so we'll divert the phones to the portables and then everyone except Bird will be there. Sounds like a plan, Franklin approved, clunking his appraised can against his friends. As he took a sip, his mobile rang. He moved out of earshot. It was Kathy Jones. Distraught, she babbled, I really think someone's watching my place. It's freaking me out. Franklin demanded details. It boiled down to Kathy's suspicions. He told her he'd come right away and listened to a long silence. She hiccuped and heaved a breath. No, don't worry, I'll go to my sister's place in Gordon. She runs an artists' commune and it's always crowded. In a steely voice, she added, Solomon won't follow us there. Page 178. Franklin wondered if her restored confidence was real or feigned. She was adamant. They debated. She won, the compromise being that she'd contact him the next day. He returned to his rod as its tip bowed and the line stretched. Shortly before her meeting, Georgie ran out to the Spider to retrieve Susan's album, her notepad and the paraphernalia she dumped on the passenger seat in her haste to get to the hospital. She sorted and set up priorities for later, momentarily confused by an unfamiliar sheet of paper. Then she recalled pulling the junk mail off her windscreen yesterday. However, when she unfolded the page and read the text, she realized it was definitely unwanted but not random or innocuous. At that instant, the full complement of the Health and Safety Committee arrived at the door. Still rattled, Georgie went into auto mode to greet and settle them at her dining table. She forced herself to focus on the director's catalogue of faults in the script. After a lengthy spiel, David halted. Georgie heaved an internal sigh, reaffixed her professional face and retaliated with her own list. Top issue, the vagueness of the brief. Her spine straightened so quickly it cracked. She'd recognized a parallel to the Hepburn quandary. All questions, no answers. No idea where to go from here. She pushed her mind to the present, and under David's pedantic command, they workshopped. Despite itching to dial the Pentecost women throughout the exhaustive meeting, the script began to crawl. By mid-afternoon, the OH&S threesome departed, confident Georgie could add the spit and polish. She immediately rang the Ballarat and Hepburn numbers burnt into her brain. No joy. On her desk, the folded sheet seemed to glow, beckoning her to pick it up. Page 179. She slammed her hand down on the letter and stuffed it into her top drawer. No one would make Georgie Harvey a victim or scare her off. She took Susan's second album to the sunny courtyard, along with her pack of Benson and Hedges and a brimming glass of Cabernet Sauvignon. Soon neither cigarettes nor alcohol could compete. The Iceman interviewed in Farmers. Disappearance. Sources revealed to the Herald Sun yesterday that John Schlicht, 57, purportedly masterminded the disappearance of Hepburn farmer Roland Pentecost, 58. Schlicht, aka the Iceman, has been a person of interest to police for numerous years, with suspected connections to Melbourne's organized crime ring. As this paper recently reported, Schlicht has been implicated in the transportation and distribution of illicit drugs and strong arm tactics at the fruit markets for 4 decades. On more than one occasion, the question has been asked, why have charges never been proven against this alleged crime boss? Asked but not answered. While accusations of police protection flourish, Schlicht's activities may finally come under long overdue scrutiny. An informant has apparently disclosed to police a connection between Schlicht and Mr. Pentecost's vanishing. Mr. Pentecost has not been seen since the early hours of Monday the 19th of March, after he and his wife, Susan, 54, were separated during their attempts to contain a mysterious blaze at the grazing property. Mrs. Pentecost suffered severe head trauma, second-degree burns to much of her body and smoke inhalation. Page 180. Fortunately, CFA volunteers discovered the unconscious woman and emergency aid was administered until she was airlifted to the Alfred Hospital. In the following days, it was revealed that Mrs. Pentecost had been attacked with a blunt instrument by an unknown assailant and she was lucky to survive her ordeal. Nearly a week after the assault, she emerged from a coma and began the slow road to recovery. Meanwhile, there was no trace of her husband, and contention regarding his involvement in the events of the 19th of March abounded. The local community in Victoria's Mineral Springs region became divided over this debate, and in the 6 months since the arson attack, police have had few leads until an associate of Schlicht turned informer yesterday. Iceman informer suicides in bizarre, missing body mystery, twist. In a shocking twist, the informer who 2 days ago made allegations to police the career criminal John Schlicht murdered missing Victorian farmer Roland Pentecost has apparently suicided in a Fitzroy flat overnight. Police were called to the Johnston Street apartment at 12:20 a.m., following a report of a disturbance at the address. They discovered the body of Angelo Sartori, aged 36, who is understood to have taken his own life by hanging. Sartori had previous convictions for the production and distribution of amphetamines, sexual assault and numerous driving offenses, including reckless driving causing serious injury. It is believed that he claimed to have witnessed the payback murder of an. Page 181. Associate of Schlicht, in addition to the attempted murder and murder of Susan Pentecost and her husband, Roland, respectively. Press accused of kangaroo court. Prominent criminal lawyer Benjamin Footman, acting for John Schlicht, 57, yesterday lashed out at police and the media with claims of bias and defamation. At a press conference outside his Camberwell office yesterday morning, Mr. Footman said, "It's trial by media. My client has not been charged with anything whatsoever connected to the distressing disappearance of Mr. Roland Pentecost, and yet the press has him convicted by its kangaroo court." Mr. Pentecost went missing contemporaneously with an attack upon his wife and arson at his farming property in Hepburn 7 months ago. This paper revealed an associate of Schlicht, Angelo Sartori, had claimed involvement in these events by his then-employer, Schlicht. However, Sartori committed suicide several days after approaching police with these claims. According to Inspector Rick Uries of the Homicide Squad, "We haven't a witness or sufficient evidence to charge Mr. Schlicht with involvement in the attempted murder of Mrs. Pentecost. Nor are we in a position to lay charges in relation to Mr. Pentecost's disappearance, although we are exploring several leads." Meanwhile, Footman yesterday continued his attack upon the media, saying, "This is an obscene breach of Mr. Schlicht's civil liberties. If there is insufficient evidence to charge my client with any crime, as there obviously is, because he is innocent of every claim, then the police, press and public have a duty to respect the presumption of innocence." He concluded the press conference with a warning that, "Any defamation of my client's character will be vigorously condemned in civil proceedings." Page 182. Immediately brought to recompense Mr. Schlicht. He is entitled to fair and reasonable compensation for the pain, suffering and financial impact on his business affairs caused by such outrageous and unjust behavior. "Let me have his body," wife begs. The wife of Central Victorian farmer Roland Pentecost has sent an open letter to the Age pleading for information relating to her husband, who has been missing since the 19th of March last year. In that letter, Mrs. Susan Pentecost states, "Over the past year, I've had too much time to think about where my husband is. In my heart I realize there is no other explanation but that he is dead and has been all along. We had 35 years of good marriage. I would like to know what happened and why, but giving Rolly a proper Christian burial is by far the most important thing. If it was you who saw my husband last, Mr. Schlicht, as some people have said, please tell me where to find Rolly, so I can give him the send-off he deserves. I promise to never tell a soul whatever else you say to me, if that's what you want. If you had a wife and the tables were turned, wouldn't she do the same?" Page 183. Chapter 22. HELLO, I think you've got yourself a live one. Lunny's eyes shone. He helped Franklin land a fat carp that would have been terrific on the barbecue if it weren't for the river grubber's muddy flavor. However, they'd had a good fishing day and bagged a brown trout and redfin between them, both of legal size, and headed for the station house. They reached How Long Road. "Pull off here, let's check the Pentecost place," Franklin directed. Although he grumbled about stone chips and dust, Lunny did as instructed. Franklin could have walked faster. At Abigeldy, there was no sign of Mick and Roger, and the off-duty policemen entered the homestead as Hart and Franklin had a day earlier. After prowling through, Franklin dropped onto a kitchen chair. He drummed his fingertips while the Sarge observed. "In theory, I can blow apart Georgie Harvey's worries, but what if there's some substance to them?" Franklin remarked. "This doesn't feel right at all." "How's that, mate?" "It's out of character for Susan. Her number one priority," he unconsciously echoed the phrase Kathy Jones used yesterday concerning Tyson, "is always this place. Even though Mick and Roger run the farm, she never leaves it for more than a few days. Besides that, she's transparent. She says it is, no matter what. You always know where you stand." "Ah, but do you really? How well do you really know Susan?" Page 184. "Well enough," Franklin said. "Remember, while you were on that secondment down in Melbourne, Bill Noonan and I were heavily involved with the arson investigation and whatnot when her hubby disappeared." "But how well do you really know anyone?" Lunny pressed. "Only as far as they want you to, right? Everyone has secrets, little ones or otherwise. Things they keep private." "Yeah, but..." "Come on, as you said earlier, Susan's gone on an impromptu holiday, that's all. Let's go, we've got beer getting warm and a barbie to crank up. Tomorrow's soon enough for you to put on your shining armor and hunt up Susan Pentecost." Franklin's guts twisted as he wondered if Lunny was right. "Hello," Pam Stewart answered. Laughter echoed in the background. Georgie gave mental thanks for at least one old duck having a mobile phone. "Where are you? Can you speak?" "Well, I just got out of the pool. Aqua aerobics is such fun, dear. You must try." "Aerobics isn't my thing," Georgie said dryly. "I'm uncoordinated." "That's the beauty of doing it in the water. No one can see exactly what your feet are doing, and it's impossible to trip up." Georgie chuckled at the image of herself in some ridiculous water aerobics pose. A sudden commotion of laughter and splashing snapped her out of the daydream. "Pam, can you please ring me when you get home?" "Of course, I won't be too long." While she waited, Georgie sculled her neglected wine and chain smoked. A quarter of an hour later, the landline rang. On speakerphone, Georgie updated Pam with Ruby's condition and her unsuccessful attempts to contact. Page 185. Susan and Margaret Pentecost. She omitted mention of the letter under her wiper but described in detail Susan's second album. Pam listened, making shocked noises. At the end, she said, "I never knew." She sounded 10 years older. "What do you mean?" "Oh, I read the articles in the newspapers. I even helped Susan write her letter to the paper. But I never knew she'd been collecting those clippings all along. I thought she was coping quite well, considering. Outwardly calm but falling apart inside." "It would seem so, dear." "Oh, no," she moaned. "I've let her down all these years. If she wanted to talk about it, she would have. And you would have listened. Naturally. So you can't blame yourself that she bottled it up. Besides, you said she keeps her friends separated. Perhaps someone else is her Rowley counselor." Georgie changed tack. "What about this schlicked angle? I gather the police were light on for suspects and at one stage the Iceman was their prime candidate. Then it just fizzled out." "You have that right, dear," Pam murmured. She sighed, then explained, "It was a very trying period for everyone. Neighbors pitted against each other, the town divided. But people took sides without thinking it through. Why would Rowley want to set fire to his own farm? Why would he try to kill Susan? The idea is absurd. You've never met a couple so devoted." Without doubt, it made more sense for this schlick man to have been behind it. He's a thug and drug dealer, after all. But why would he hurt Rowley? We never understood. There were all sorts of stories bandying to and fro, but they didn't make sense. Georgie cut in, because Sartori killed himself before he made an official statement. Yes, that and because he was a convicted felon himself. Could anybody trust him? Page 186. True, not the ideal witness. What we heard about Angelo Sartori was so vague, that he witnessed John Schlicht kill this other chap and was part of the gang that set fire to Abigeldy. He alluded to them killing Rowley but then killed himself before he explained everything, including why they had to kill our friend. Pam broke off, her sighs stabbed at Georgie, who didn't know what to say. Neither spoke for a minute, then Pam said, "Oh, I'm not stupid. I do realize criminals don't have to use logic like the rest of us or play by normal rules. It could have been as daft as Rolly looking at the wrong person the wrong way, I guess. Money for nothing, sex without strings and punishment without police or court. What, dear? Something I read once, along the lines that criminals go for instant gratification, with no concern about right and wrong or the things that constrain the rest of us. What else are you thinking? Pam asked a moment later. Makes you wonder if Sartori killed himself or if somebody did it for him. Pam sucked in a breath. It does, indeed. They contemplated the twist in silence. Georgie didn't know what her friend was mulling over, but she picked left on her car and started to sweat on its sender. Georgie turned her focus back to the Pentecosts. What else can you tell me? I don't know, Pam's voice trilled. My memory's not as good as it used to be. Not so's you'd notice. If you knew me 10 years ago, you'd think differently. I'm not as quick to recall details or think laterally as I was. Okay, I'll give you a specific. Georgie realized that what she said next. Page 187. Woodwound, necessary evil. Tell me about the day of the fire. She heard Pam take several juddering breaths, and her heartbeat accelerated as she waited. After a long gap, she wondered if Pam would answer at all. She shifted the phone to make room for her notepad on the desk as Pam sighed. She traced random doodles into the margin and stilled her impatience. Certain things can't be rushed, like brewing a good beer. She knew if she pressed Pam too hard, she might push her away. Finally, Pam said, well, we had lunch together, the three of us, at Abigeldi. As you know, I don't drive and Rolly, as usual, was busy around the farm with Mick and Roger. So, Susan picked me up in her four-wheel drive. That's good, keep going, Georgie urged. I remember that Rolly's tea went cold because Jenny Maguire from the Advocate arrived. A journo from the local rag. Yes, she was writing a story on Rolly. He'd gone to the aid of an accident the previous evening. Her idea was to tie this into a piece on his achievements and active involvement in the community, that type of thing. When they finished, we all had afternoon tea. That's right, we baked scones. Pam laughed, recalling the trivial detail. Georgie grounded her, and then what happened? Well, Susan and Rolly were going to dinner. What was the occasion? None. They were taking up a special at Windows on Vincent. Georgie vaguely remembered the restaurant but couldn't picture it in the context of her recent excursions. Is it still there? It became a pancake place and changed again since. Oh, I am enjoying this detective work. Pam sobered. Perhaps it struck her that she verged upon the last time Roland Pentecost was seen alive. Oh, that's not appropriate, is it? It's okay, better to laugh than cry, usually. Yes, well, in any event, Rolly and Susan dropped me home on their way to Page 188. The restaurant. They had booked an early sitting. It must have been between 6 and 6:30. And then, Georgie prompted. Well, that's all I know firsthand. From what Susan told me, they had a wonderful evening. It was just as well, as it turned out. One last special night. Pam cleared her throat and continued. They returned home and went to bed after checking all the usual things. Go on. She sighed deeply. In the middle of the night, well, not long past midnight, Rolly woke suddenly. He shook Susan awake and they went outside in their pajamas with jumpers over the top. They found the sheds alight, and Rolly jumped into fighting the flames while Susan phoned the CFA. Georgie visualized. It morphed into real time, shivering in my PJs. Pam said, she phoned the captain, Phil Isaacs. Then she pulled on a pair of work boots and went back outside. The strong wind that night made matters worse. It made it harder to see through the smoke and stirred up the flames. Georgie was surrounded by a dark night sky, orange aura near the sheds. Horrific noises, cracking, roaring, snapping. But she made out that the fire had almost taken the hay shed and other buildings were under threat or on fire. She struggled against the noxious smoke. Her eyes watered so much she could barely see. Pam paused. Georgie couldn't see properly, fumes burning her lungs, coughing, gasping. Susan called and called but she couldn't hear a thing above the roar, and the animals going berserk. Her throat hurt from the smoke and from screaming for Rolly. She couldn't find him. Georgie teared up. She did what she could with blankets and buckets of water, Pam continued, praying the firefighters would arrive before the whole place went up. She doesn't recall what happened next. There's a big blank until she woke up in hospital days later. In a high-strung tone, she said, they left her for dead. That was the plan, too. Page 189. Knock her out and let the fire finish her off. Chances are they hoped to frame Rolly for it, or banked on everyone assuming there were two bodies. Pam sobbed. A prick of pain responded in Georgie. She searched for reassurance, a positive. Well, Susan survived their horrible plan. Whoever they were, she must be a very gutsy lady. Oh, she is. That's why I have to believe she's safe and well. Yes, you do. There's no point thinking otherwise. I pray for her safety. Pray hard to your God, Pam. Pray hard. Keep your nose out of things that are none of your business. You will only get one warning. Ordinary copy paper, one run-on sentence, printed in Arial font, in landscape orientation, all uppercase, approximately 50 point and bold type with the word one underlined. Georgie had an enemy. Who? It had to be connected with Susan. She couldn't imagine being warned off the first aid job. That made a nervous laugh pop out. At least I've still got my sense of humor. Back to business. Who had she pissed off? Who had she stirred up over the past few days? Top of the list, Roger and Mick, the farmers from Abigeldy. And she had a bruise to prove it. Next, Lewis Davis from the Springs Real Estate. He definitely regretted sharing his Tim Tams with her. Lewis's buddy Douglas McDougall, even though she'd get to meet him. Page 190. Surely not Susan's neighbors, the Pattersons. What about Pam? That lovely old duck could not be behind the threat. Scratch Pam. She couldn't forget John Franklin but doubted he'd bother with a note. The sexist local cop would take a direct approach. AJ, it was so wrong on so many levels to even add him to the list that she cringed, but he did try to be overprotective. Fortunately, he'd been busy in his office when she called alerting him to Ruby's second heart attack and hadn't even known she'd returned to Dalesford. She crossed him off again. Georgie reread the note twice more. Nobody but Pam knew she'd stumbled on the schlictangle, right? She puckered her lips. Make the Pam and Bron. On a long shot, the farmers and the cops might have an inkling too. And with every extra person came the chance of something said, overheard, slipping. She gulped a finger of scotch. I am not scared, and I am not giving up until I've found Susan. She felt like one of Enid Blyton's famous 5 on an adventure. You could call it 5 go to Castlemaine or 5 find the truth, except she didn't have anybody with her. So perhaps it should be 1 on a quest. She giggled a trifle shrilly. Years earlier, a friend had said you reach a point where you don't become older in your mind, even though your body ages. Up until a few years ago, she'd agreed. Her mind stayed around mid-20s, old enough to have some sense, young enough to be optimistic and resilient. Since then, both mind and body had started to crack up. But today she took on a mission. She donned slacks and sensible shoes and packed a synthetic shopping bag. Food, water, torch, map and directions. She pulled her niece's sun hat over wiry hair. If she'd been at her own home, she would have taken a host. Page 191. Of other things. Her smile faded. She settled on adding a carving knife from the kitchen drawer and the tie lever from her toolbox. No good pretending this was a girl's own escapade. Page 192. Thursday the 18th of March. Page 193. Chapter 23. That's not your girlfriend's alpha, is it, mate? Franklin followed Mick Sprague's finger to a black convertible. He ignored the jibe about the wacko Melburnian being his girlfriend. Slam went on, course, I didn't meet her the other day. But seeing as we don't get many of the old alphas around here, I'm guessing. The number plate matched. It's no coincidence. It's Harvey's all right.
25% forward rewind audio. Slider. Previous page. Button. Next page. Rewind forward 10 seconds. Replay page. Button. Play. Button.
तो नाज़रीन आज के लिए इतना ही काफ़ी है। तो अगर आप चैनल पर नहीं हो तो चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करें, स्ट्रीमिंग को लाइक करें और इसके लिंक को शेयर करें और कमेंट सेक्शन बॉक्स में अपनी कीमती राय का इजहार ज़रूर करें।
Home. Button. Recent apps. System launcher. Settings. Recorder. YouTube. YouTube. Create. Button. Live. Stream interrupted. Stream interrupted. You want to resume your last stream and live off? End. Button.